My suitcase hit the grass before I did. I stood there, keys still in my hand, watching my clothes, my shoes, my framed photos scattered across the yard like garbage put out too early. A blouse I wore to church dinners was tangled in a rose bush. My winter coat lay half-soaked from the morning dew. Someone had dragged my life outside and left it there without a second thought. If you've ever been dismissed, disrespected, or pushed aside by family, stay with this story. What happens next is something no one saw coming. I didn't scream. That surprised even me. My chest tightened, my throat burned, but I stayed still, breathing slow, the way you do when you don't want anyone to see you break. Somewhere inside me, something quiet clicked into place. It was just after 9 in the morning. The sun was already warm, bright enough to make everything look too clear, too exposed. A lawn mower hummed down the street. A car door slammed 2 houses over. Life went on as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just walked into my own humiliation. I bent down and picked up my purse. It had been emptied. Receipts fluttered near the sidewalk. I noticed that first, not the anger, not the shame. The small details. What was taken? What was left behind? What someone thought mattered and what they believed didn't. Don't make a scene, I told myself quietly. I said it the way I used to when my children were small and tempers ran high. Calm first. Think second. React last. Her voice came from the porch before I saw her. We decided to clean, she said, light and careless, like she was talking about rearranging cushions. Those old things were taking up space. I looked up. She stood there with her arms folded, perfectly put together, hair neat, shoes spotless. She didn't look nervous. She looked satisfied. That told me more than her words ever could. I nodded once, slowly, as if I were agreeing with her. Inside I was already counting. Time. Distance. Witnesses. I noticed the neighbor's curtains twitch. I noticed the way she blocked the doorway, how her foot rested just inside the frame, claiming territory. Some of it's mine, I said evenly. My voice sounded steady, older than I felt. He shrugged. You don't need it anymore. That sentence landed harder than anything else. Not the mess. Not the exposure. The certainty in her tone. The decision made without me. I felt my stomach drop, but my hands stayed calm at my sides. I stepped forward and knelt to gather a photo album. The cover was bent. Inside were pictures she'd never bothered to look at. Birthdays. A younger version of myself, smiling, unaware of mornings like this. As I stood, I felt the weight of something familiar in my pocket. I touched it without looking. A folded paper. Thin. Ordinary. Something she had never asked about. The yard smelled like cut grass and dust. My knees protested as I straightened, but I ignored the ache. Pain had taught me patience over the years. You should have told me, I said. She laughed softly. There wasn't anything to tell. That was when I realized this wasn't anger or impulse. It was permission she believed she had. Given by silence. Fed by years of me choosing peace over conflict. I walked to the driveway and set my purse on the hood of my car. The metal was warm. I grounded myself there for a moment, palms flat, breath slow. A man from across the street cleared his throat awkwardly, pretending to check his mailbox. I met his eyes briefly and nodded. I wasn't ashamed. That, too, surprised me. I returned to the yard and picked up my suitcase. The zipper was broken. Someone had forced it. That detail lodged itself in my memory, sharp and deliberate. Are you finished? She asked. I looked at her, then really looked. At the tight smile. At the way she avoided my eyes now. At the tension she couldn't hide as the moment stretched longer than she expected. Almost, I said. She sighed, impatient. We don't want drama. I nearly laughed. Instead, I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. The calm in my body felt unnatural, like standing in the eye of a storm. As I moved through the scattered things, small memories surfaced. A letter I'd saved. A receipt. A notebook she'd probably flipped through and dismissed. I noticed what she hadn't touched. That mattered more than what she had. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Whoever it was could wait. This moment needed my full attention. You can leave the rest, she said. We'll handle it. I straightened slowly. No, I replied. One word. Clear. He stiffened. Excuse me. I'll decide what stays, I said. The air between us shifted. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just enough to unsettle her. For the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. It was brief, but it was there. I carried the last box to my car and set it gently inside. My hands didn't shake. Years ago they would have. Age had taught me control. When I turned back, she was still standing on the porch, arms crossed tighter now. "You're overreacting," she said. I smiled. Not wide. Not kind. Just enough. "I haven't reacted yet," I told her. She frowned, confused. She was used to tears. Pleading. Silence. Not this. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the yard. My yard. That thought came uninvited, heavy and grounding. I stepped closer to the porch until we were only a few feet apart. I could smell her perfume, sweet and overpowering. She lifted her chin, daring me. I met her eyes and held them. Years of being underestimated settled behind my gaze, steady and unblinking. "You should have asked," I said quietly. Her smile didn't return. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice low, challenging. I looked past her into the house at the doorway she guarded so carefully. I thought of the paper in my pocket. I thought of the long months that led to this moment. "I'm going to finish cleaning," I said. She laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Good luck." I turned away without another word, leaving her standing there, confident and unaware, while the weight of what she'd started settled slowly into place. I walked to my car without looking back, feeling her stare on my shoulders as I drove away and let the silence stretch longer than she expected. The engine sounded louder than usual, or maybe my nerves were finally letting me hear it, every rattle and hum reminding me that I was still in control of myself if nothing else. I didn't go far, just around the corner to the small public lot near the library, where I could sit without being watched and let my hands rest on the steering wheel. My fingers ached, not from lifting boxes but from holding everything in, and when I finally exhaled it came out slow and steady, the way I'd learned to breathe through disappointment. I checked the mirror and saw my own face, older, lined but calm, and that calm felt like armor I'd earned the hard way. I stayed there longer than I planned, watching people come and go, pretending my world hadn't just tilted. The quiet wrapped around me, thick and almost comforting, and I realized how often silence had protected me in the past. I had learned years ago that reacting too quickly only fed the fire, and I wasn't interested in giving her anything to burn. Instead, I let the quiet settle, knowing it made people careless. Silence, I had learned, was often mistaken for weakness. My phone buzzed again, and this time I looked. A message from my son sat on the screen, short and careful, asking where I was. I didn't answer. That choice felt heavier than the boxes I'd lifted, but I knew if I spoke too soon I'd say the wrong thing. I slid the phone into my purse and rested my head back against the seat, listening to my own heartbeat slow. When I finally drove again, I took the long way, letting familiar streets remind me of who I was before everything became complicated. The houses blurred past, each one holding its own quiet struggles, and I wondered how many women inside them were swallowing words the way I always had. By the time I reached the small storage unit I'd rented months earlier, my hands were steady. I parked, unlocked the door and stepped inside the cool, dim space that smelled faintly of cardboard and dust. It felt strangely comforting, like a place that expected nothing from me. I set my boxes down carefully, taking inventory without rushing. Some things were damaged, some were fine, and some were missing entirely. I noted it all in my head, not with anger but with clarity. There was relief in knowing exactly where I stood, even if it wasn't where I wanted to be. I closed the unit and locked it, the click of the padlock sounding final in a way that steadied me. Back in my car, I sat with my purse on my lap and reached into the side pocket. My fingers brushed the folded paper again. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just knowing it was there kept me grounded, a quiet reminder that not everything had been taken from me. Some things were still exactly where I'd left them. I drove to a small diner I used to visit years ago, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing all morning. The waitress recognized me, or maybe she just recognized the look on my face. She didn't ask questions. She brought me coffee and set it down gently, like she understood the importance of small kindnesses. I wrapped my hands around the mug and let the warmth seep into my palms. As I sat there, I replayed the morning in pieces, not to torture myself but to understand it. The way my daughter-in-law had stood in the doorway. The confidence in her voice. The way she assumed I would fold. Each detail fit together like parts of a puzzle, and the picture they formed was clearer than I wanted to admit. She had grown comfortable. Comfortable enough to forget who had kept that household running long before she arrived. A man at the counter laughed too loudly at something on his phone, and I flinched before catching myself. I reminded myself that not everything was a threat. Still, my body stayed alert, tuned to every sound and movement. Age hadn't dulled my instincts. If anything, it had sharpened them. When I paid and stood to leave, my phone buzzed again. This time it was her name on the screen. I stared at it, feeling a familiar pressure behind my eyes, then let it ring until it stopped. I wasn't ready to give her my voice. Silence once again felt like the safer choice. I spent the afternoon moving slowly, deliberately. I picked up a few necessities, spoke to no one I didn't have to, and kept my thoughts close. Every small task felt purposeful, as if I were laying invisible groundwork. I noticed how easy it was for people to underestimate a woman my age. Clerks spoke louder than necessary. Strangers assumed I was confused. I let them. By the time evening came, I found myself back in the quiet of a borrowed room, sitting on the edge of the bed with my shoes still on. The day caught up to me then, the exhaustion settling into my bones. I stared at the wall and let myself feel it, the hurt, the disbelief, the dull ache of being pushed aside. I didn't fight it. I just let it pass through me. My phone lit up once more. Another message from my son, longer this time, asking me to come home so we could talk. I read it twice, then set the phone down face first on the table. He didn't know yet what his silence had cost. He didn't know how much mine had protected him. I lay back and closed my eyes, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the building settling around me. In the quiet, I thought about all the times I'd stayed silent to keep peace, to smooth things over, to make life easier for everyone else. That silence had taught her she could do whatever she wanted. It had taught her I wouldn't push back. The night stretched on, and with it came memories I hadn't invited but didn't push away. I remembered early mornings packing lunches, late nights balancing checkbooks, the quiet pride of holding things together without applause. Those memories didn't make me weak. They reminded me how much responsibility I'd carried without complaint. Responsibility, I understood now, could also be power when used deliberately. I got up and unpacked my purse, laying its contents on the small table. Keys, receipts, a notebook with worn edges. Each item had a place, and putting them in order calmed me. Order had always been my way back to myself. I wrote a short list in the notebook, nothing dramatic, just reminders, times, names. It wasn't a plan yet, but it was the beginning of one. Outside, a door slammed somewhere down the hall and footsteps passed. I stayed still, listening, reminding myself that I was safe. The world hadn't ended. It had simply shifted. There was a strange relief in that realization. Change, even painful change, meant movement. And movement meant possibility. Before turning off the light, I checked my phone one last time. No new messages. I set it on the table, screen down, and climbed into bed fully dressed. Sleep came in pieces, shallow and restless, but it came. In the quiet hours, my silence continued to do its work, settling around her like a question she couldn't yet answer. By morning, I knew she would be uneasy, replaying the yard, my calm, my refusal to react. She would tell herself she'd won. That belief would make her bold. And boldness, I understood, always comes before a fall. I let that thought settle, steady and patient, as the silence kept working for me without my help. I let that thought settle, steady and patient, and by mid-morning the quiet began to show small cracks in her confidence. The phone rang while I was pouring coffee, and the sound made me pause, listening to it echo through the room. I didn't answer, choosing instead to sip slowly, watching steam rise and disappear. Minutes later a message arrived, clipped and irritated, asking if I knew why the internet wasn't working. I smiled, feeling a subtle shift under my ribs, the first tremor of discomfort she hadn't planned for. I set the phone down, finished my coffee, and waited. I stayed where I was, letting the quiet stretch, knowing impatience always reveals more than answers do. The house felt different, not hostile but alert, like it was listening with me. I moved through rooms slowly, touching familiar surfaces, the edge of a table, the back of a chair, grounding myself in what hadn't changed. Outside, a delivery truck stopped, then drove off, leaving the street unusually still. Another message arrived, sharper now, asking if I had paid a bill. I read it twice, then placed the phone face down, my pulse steady, breathing slow. Silence had taught me patience. I waited for the next sound, the next demand, but what came instead was absence. That gap spoke loudly, telling me she was unsettled, checking switches, tapping screens, wondering how comfort could slip so quietly. I folded laundry that wasn't mine, careful and methodical, my hands busy while my mind stayed clear. The radio murmured in the background, a familiar voice discussing weather, nothing urgent, nothing wrong. Yet my shoulders stayed tight, alert to the undercurrent beneath ordinary sounds. When the phone rang, I answered, greeting her with warmth she didn't return. "Something's wrong," she said, trying to sound casual. She spoke quickly, frustration leaking through clipped questions about passwords and accounts she barely understood. I listened, letting her words pile up, nodding even though she couldn't see me. There was power in that pause, in giving her room to expose how much she depended on things she never managed. A car passed outside, tires hissing on pavement, and the ordinary sound steadied me. I answered carefully, offering nothing useful, suggesting she restart something, check again. Her sigh was sharp, controlled, but I heard the strain underneath. When she hung up, I held the phone, aware the balance had shifted. I didn't celebrate the change. I respected it the way you respect weather turning. Respect kept me measured, prevented careless joy. I stepped outside for air, the smell of warm asphalt mixing with cut grass. The sky was wide and bright, almost unfair in its calm. Across the street, a neighbor waved and I waved back, ordinary as ever. Inside my chest, though, something loosened just enough to let relief in. Another message arrived, asking about a payment date. I typed a brief response, neutral, then set the phone aside. I reminded myself that comfort rarely disappears all at once. It frays at the edges first, and those edges were starting to show. I noticed how she asked questions differently, softer but more frequent. Need crept into her tone, and that told me everything. I went about my afternoon making soup, chopping vegetables, the knife tapping rhythmically against the board. The motion calmed me, reminded me of years spent feeding others without thanks. The phone rang again, and this time her voice wavered. "Can you check something for me?" she asked, the question careful. I paused, stirring the pot, then answered, "I'll look later." The silence after that felt heavy. I wasn't being cruel. I was being clear, and clarity can feel harsh to those unprepared. The afternoon light shifted, shadows stretching across the floor. I sat at the table, opening my notebook, writing small, careful notes. Dates mattered. Details mattered. Writing steadied my thoughts, turned emotion into something manageable. Outside, a dog barked, then quieted. My phone buzzed again, this time unanswered. I felt a brief pinch of guilt, then let it go. I had spent too long cushioning others from consequences. Comfort grows when silence removes friction. I closed the notebook, knowing friction had returned. Breathing felt easier. By evening, her unease had a shape, and it pressed against me through short, clipped calls. I answered one, letting her speak herself into circles. She blamed systems, companies, timing. Not once did she question her assumptions. That told me she still believed control was hers by right. I listened to the scrape of anxiety beneath her words. "Things just don't stop like this," she said. I replied, "Sometimes they do." The pause that followed was long, thick with disbelief. I ended the call, my hands steady. Outside, dusk made the world seem softer. I knew forgiveness wasn't required. Yet, I slept lightly, aware even in dreams that balance was shifting again. Morning brought another message, this one less sharp, more uncertain. She asked if I could stop by later. The request felt heavier than a demand. I dressed slowly, choosing comfort over appearance. Age had taught me the value of ease. As I drove, sunlight flashed through trees, blinding me. I welcomed it, blinking back clarity. At a red light, I noticed my hands steady on the wheel. That steadiness felt earned. When I arrived, I stayed in the car, listening to the engine idle. Inside, something was loosening. I didn't go in right away, letting her wait with questions she couldn't answer. Waiting changes people. It forces them to sit with their assumptions. I watched the front door through the windshield, noticing how often it opened, then closed again. Each movement hinted at restlessness. My phone stayed quiet. No instructions, no demands. When I finally stepped out, the air felt cooler. I straightened my jacket, adjusted my posture. Small preparations matter before difficult conversations. As I walked up, the door opened abruptly. She stood there, trying to smile. The effort showed. I said nothing, letting the moment stretch. Her house felt different now, charged with an energy she couldn't control. She talked too much, filling space with explanations. I listened, nodding, taking in details she didn't realize she was giving. The smell of cleaning products hung in the air, sharp and unnecessary. She hovered, watching me closely. I sat when invited, folding my hands in my lap. My body felt calm, grounded. Her foot tapped against the floor. The contrast was striking. She asked if I knew what was happening. I met her eyes, paused, then said, "Not yet." That answer unsettled her. I could see it land. Questions hung between us, unanswered, shaping the space more than words. He paced, stopped, then paced again. Each movement chipped away at her confidence. I noticed a stack of unopened mail on the counter. She noticed me noticing. Her hand twitched. I asked casually about it. She waved it off too quickly. That told me it mattered. I didn't press. Pressure would come later. For now, observation was enough. The clock ticked, loud in the quiet. She finally stopped moving. "What do you want?" she asked. I answered, "To understand." It wasn't a lie. Everything else could wait. For now. The visit ended without resolution, but the air felt thinner when I left. She stood in the doorway watching me go. I walked to my car slowly, aware of her gaze following. Once inside, I sat still, listening to my breathing. Came easier now. I drove away without looking back. At the corner, I stopped, letting the moment settle. Her comfort had cracked. Not broken, but compromised. That difference mattered. I felt no triumph, only certainty. Change was underway. The road ahead stretched and open. I followed it, steady and unhurried. Questions multiplied behind me. I let them grow. That knowledge stayed with me, a weight as the day settled into night. I returned to my room, setting my keys down carefully. The light hummed softly overhead. I sat on the bed, shoes still on, listening to the building breathe. My body felt tired but alert. Comfort had begun to betray her. She didn't know it yet. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. Patience settled in beside me. Whatever came next would come because she believed I was finished. That belief would guide her choices. I closed my eyes, letting the dark hold the questions I hadn't asked. And when I opened them again, my hand was already reaching for my purse. The room was quiet in that deep late evening way, the kind of quiet that makes every movement sound louder than it is. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle into my shoulders, and placed the purse on the bed beside me. The zipper made a soft, familiar sound as I opened it, and my fingers went straight to the inner pocket without hesitation. I didn't rush. Rushing had never helped me before. The folder slid out heavier than it looked, its edges worn smooth from being handled so many times. I rested it on my lap, both hands flat on the cover, breathing in through my nose, out through my mouth. This wasn't anger I felt. It was focus. A steady, deliberate readiness that came from knowing I had done my work carefully. I ran my thumb along the spine, feeling the slight bend where it had been folded and unfolded again and again. He had never seen it. That was important. I stood and carried the folder to the small desk by the window, setting it down beneath the lamp. The light flickered once before settling, casting a soft glow over the cover. The room smelled faintly of clean sheets and old paper. I pulled out the chair and sat, my knees stiff, my back straight. For a moment I simply looked at it. Years of staying quiet had taught me restraint even now. When I opened the folder, the first page greeted me like an old friend. Not comforting but familiar. Dates. Names. Notes written in my own careful handwriting. I traced one line with my finger, grounding myself in the physical proof of time passing. This hadn't been created in a moment of anger. It had been built slowly, piece by piece, during afternoons when no one noticed me sitting at the table. Being overlooked had given me space. I turned the page and felt the weight of memory settle in my chest. Each document represented a decision, a moment when I chose to observe instead of confront. At the time, that choice had felt like weakness. Now it felt like preparation. I adjusted the stack, aligning the edges, an old habit from years of keeping records straight. Order calmed me. It always had. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, startling me just enough to make my heart jump. I didn't reach for it right away. Instead, I closed the folder halfway and rested my palms on top. The buzzing stopped, replaced by silence. I waited another minute before checking. A short message from her, polite in tone, asking if we could talk again. I set the phone back down without replying. Some conversations needed structure. The next morning came quietly, light slipping through the curtains before I was ready. My body woke before my mind, stiff but alert. I showered, dressed carefully, and ate a small breakfast without tasting it. The folder stayed on the desk exactly where I'd left it, waiting. When I picked it up, the familiar weight steadied me. I slipped it into my bag, zipped it closed, and checked twice to be sure. Old habits again. The drive over felt longer than usual, each stoplight stretching my patience thin. My hand stayed steady on the wheel, though my jaw ached from clenching. I reminded myself why I was doing this. Not to win. Not to humiliate. But to be seen clearly for once. When I parked, I sat for a moment listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The folder rested against my side, solid and present. She opened the door before I could knock, her smile practiced and tight. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. I noticed the way her eyes flicked to my bag, then back to my face. The house smelled different, like something sweet trying to cover something sour. I stepped inside, letting the door close behind me, the sound final and deliberate. We walked to the table without speaking. She talked as she moved, explaining, justifying, filling the air. I listened without interrupting, setting my bag down carefully. When she finally paused, waiting for a response, I reached inside and pulled out the folder. I didn't slam it down. I placed it gently between us, aligning it with the edge of the table. Her eyes dropped to it, confusion flickering across her face. "What's that?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. I noticed the slight tremor as she folded them together. "Something you never asked about," I replied. I opened the folder slowly, turning the first page toward her. The sound of paper shifting seemed loud in the quiet room. She leaned forward despite herself. As she read, her breathing changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. I didn't explain. I let the words speak for themselves. Page by page, the story unfolded, not in accusations but in facts. She tried to interrupt once, then stopped when she saw I wasn't finished. Her confidence began to thin like fabric worn too often. She looked up at me, eyes sharp. "Why do you have this?" she asked. I met her gaze without flinching. "Because I paid attention," I said. The answer wasn't cruel. It was true. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She turned back to the folder, flipping pages faster now, searching for something. I watched her carefully, noting which pages made her pause. The room felt smaller as the minutes passed. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time neither of us could stop. She pushed the folder away slightly, as if distance might lessen its weight. "That doesn't mean what you think it does," she said. Her voice wavered just a little. I nodded once. "It means what it says," I replied. "Nothing more." She stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. Her steps were quick, uneven. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, posture calm. Years ago I would have stood too, matched her energy. Now I let stillness do the work. She stopped and faced me, frustration written plainly across her face. "You can't just bring this out now," she said. I raised an eyebrow slightly. "I didn't," I said. "You did." Silence filled the space between us, heavy and uncomfortable. She sat back down slowly, eyes fixed on the folder as if it might move on its own. I slid it back toward myself, closing it with care. "This isn't finished," I said quietly. Her head snapped up. "What do you want?" she asked again, sharper this time. I considered the question, then answered honestly. "To stop being invisible." Her expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. She looked away, jaw tight. Outside, a car passed, tires crunching over gravel. Life continued, indifferent. I gathered the folder and slipped it back into my bag. The tension didn't leave with it. It lingered, settling into the walls, the air, her posture. When I stood to leave, she didn't stop me. She watched, calculating, reassessing. At the door I paused and turned back. "This doesn't go away," I said calmly. "I know," she replied, barely above a whisper. That acknowledgement told me more than anger ever could. I stepped outside, breathing in deeply, letting the fresh air clear my lungs. My legs felt unsteady for a moment, then firmed beneath me. As I walked to my car, the folder pressed against my side, a quiet reminder of balance shifting. I didn't feel victorious. I felt ready. The engine started on the first try. I drove away without looking back, knowing the questions I'd placed between us would follow her long after I was gone. And that knowledge settled into me like a steady breath I had been holding for years. The road felt smoother beneath the tires, familiar turns opening in front of me as if they had been waiting. I didn't hurry. There was no need anymore. The folder rested beside me on the seat, quiet and certain, no longer a secret but not yet finished doing its work. When I reached home, I parked in the driveway and sat there with the engine off, listening to the ticking as it cooled. The house looked the same from the outside, calm and ordinary, but I knew better now. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me with a softness that felt intentional. The air smelled familiar, like wood and old fabric, grounding me in years of living that couldn't be erased by one cruel morning. I set my bag down and removed the folder, placing it on the table where sunlight fell across it. My phone rang almost immediately. I watched it vibrate, feeling no rush to answer. When I finally picked up, her voice was tight, stripped of confidence. "You didn't tell me everything," she said. "I didn't need to," I replied. The truth had already done its work. There was a pause, then a sharp inhale on the other end. "What are you trying to do?" she asked. I leaned back in my chair, the wood cool against my spine. "I'm taking back what was always mine," I said quietly. She arrived an hour later, alone. No entourage. No audience. That mattered. I heard her knock and let it linger before opening the door. Her posture was different now, shoulders tense, hands uncertain. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited, eyes scanning the room as if it might have changed. It hadn't. I gestured toward the table. "Sit," I said. She did, though reluctantly. I opened the folder and turned it toward her, not gently this time, but firmly. "This is the part you missed," I said. Inside were documents she hadn't expected, signatures she hadn't noticed, dates that predated her confidence. Her eyes moved quickly, then slower, disbelief settling in. "You can't," she whispered. "I already did," I replied. The words felt solid, earned. She pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. "That's not fair," she said. I nodded once. "I know," I answered. "Neither was what you did." The room felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. She tried to argue, her words tumbling over each other, but they lacked direction. Facts don't bend to volume. They sit patiently and wait. When she finally stopped talking, the silence between us felt different from before. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of clarity, consequence, and choice. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "I'm here to correct something." She stared at me, eyes glossy, jaw tight. "What happens now?" she asked. I closed the folder. "Now," I said, "things change." The practical details followed, calm and deliberate. I explained what would happen next, step by step, without emotion. She listened, no longer interrupting. Each sentence landed with weight, reshaping her understanding of the ground beneath her. By the time I finished, she looked smaller, not broken but aware. Awareness can be uncomfortable. I stood and walked to the window, letting light fall across my hands. "I'm not disappearing," I told her. "I'm reclaiming my place." She left quietly. No slammed doors. No final threats. Just the sound of footsteps retreating down the walk. When the door closed behind her, I stayed where I was, breathing in deeply. The house felt mine again, not because of paperwork but because I no longer felt like a guest inside it. That shift was everything. Later my son called. His voice was uncertain, searching. "She told me," he said. "I know," I replied. There was a long pause, then a question he should have asked years ago. "Why didn't you say anything before?" I looked around the room at the life I had built quietly. "Because I thought silence was kindness," I said. "And now I know better." We talked for a long time, not arguing, just speaking honestly. Some things were resolved. Some weren't. That was enough. I didn't need everything fixed in one day. I needed respect, and that had finally been established. When we hung up, I felt tired in a good way, the kind that comes after carrying something heavy and finally setting it down. That evening, I walked through the house slowly, touching familiar objects with new intention. The chair by the window. The worn edge of the counter. Each thing felt returned to me, not taken back but acknowledged. I brewed tea and sat at the table, the folder now closed and set aside. It had served its purpose. The power wasn't in the papers anymore. It was in me. As night settled, I reflected on the woman I had been that morning in the yard. Quiet. So unseen. I didn't resent her. She had done what she knew how to do at the time. But I was no longer her. I had stepped into something firmer, clearer. My silence was no longer a shield for others. It was a choice I controlled. I turned off the lights one by one, leaving the house wrapped in calm. In the bedroom, I paused, listening to the familiar quiet. Felt different now, not heavy, not imposed. It felt earned. I lay down, letting my body rest fully for the first time in days. Sleep came easily. In the morning, sunlight filled the room, warm and honest. I stood at the window and looked out at the yard where everything had begun. It was empty now, peaceful. I smiled, not with satisfaction but with certainty. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't begged. I hadn't broken. I had waited, prepared, and chosen myself. That was the day I took my silence back. If this story spoke to you, subscribe for more powerful, emotional stories about strength, silence, and taking back control. You're not alone here.